discussion that we're going to have, which is going to be a really rich discussion on how you think about decisions regarding cancer treatments. We can extend that just a bit if we need to, and if that conversation comes to a natural close, then we'd still be able to end a little bit early for lunch. So, if you, as you're thinking about your public comments, please 3 minutes. Okay. Well, building on the great discussion we've had so far, and again, I want to thank everyone who is so courageously sharing your experiences. We're going to move into topic 2, but before we do that, we are going to summarize some of the comments that we've heard on the web that maybe we haven't heard, that haven't been mentioned here yet.
Thank you, Sarah. So we have someone from the web who wants to provide a gentle reminder that irrespective of smoking histories, everyone deserves to live and to be treated as deserving to live. Participants on the web share similar symptoms presented in the room, including fatigue, shortness of breath, lack of concentration, memory retention, and neuropathy. A different symptom mentioned includes side effects from a drug, which results in drop in testosterone level. It was also mentioned that nutrition and physical exercise have helped with side effects. Web participants also feel there is a need to also address emotional side effects, which have not been addressed here. Thank you.
Thank you, Pujita. So we're going to move into discussion topic 2, which is really the perspective on current approaches to treating lung cancer. And we did talk a lot about the symptoms of those, and we can expand upon that too. I think we're going to hear some from the panels. But we'll move into talking about how you really get into making those treatment decisions and what you think about and how you weigh different considerations and what's important to you. So this is going to be a very exciting discussion. We have some great panel participants up here. They represent patients and patient advocates. So I'll let you introduce yourselves because I don't think we have them in order here. So if you could just state your name, and if you want to state what affiliation you are with or who you associate with, feel free.
Good morning. My name is Denise Hogan. I work for ALA. I'm part of Power Against Tobacco, and I have been free of cancer for close to 3 years.
Can everyone hear Denise? Is everyone hearing? Okay.
It was on, no? Did you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
And hello, my name is Dr. Karen R. Scott. I'm a physician, and I've been free of cancer symptoms for 6 years now, and I am a professor at a medical school, and I'm a member of Lung Cancer Alliance as a patient advocate.
My name is John Ryan. I'm at the front end of this simply as a cancer patient. 9 weeks ago today, I didn't know anything about it. I'm just finishing my first chemotherapy phase.
Hi, my name is Shelly Fold-Nasso, and I'm Senior Director of Policy for the National Coalition for Cancer Survivorship. And we advocate on behalf of cancer patients in terms of quality of care.
My name is Stephanie Haney. I am a lung cancer survivor. I was diagnosed at stage 4 about 5.5 years ago.
Thank you very much. So we've asked the panelists again to prepare 3 to 4 minutes of remarks. And once we hear that, time permitting for the panel discussion, we'll see if there's any follow-up questions, but then we'll move into the large group facilitated discussion. And again, the questions are on the back of your agenda, but basically want to understand your thoughts on the treatment, on the cancer treatments you are currently undergoing or have undergone in the past that help reduce or control the spread of your lung cancer, as Sean described those today. What supportive care treatments you're taking to help or improve or manage the symptoms that you talked about earlier today. what you're thinking about your overall goals for treatment and how you weigh the importance specifically of prolonging your life versus improving your symptoms, and what you really take into account when you do that, when you think about those two goals, and what other factors you take into account when making decisions about using treatments. So with that, I will stop talking and turn it over to Denise to begin. Thank you, Denise.
Okay, good morning again. Thank you, the FDA, for having us. I was diagnosed with stage 2 non-small cell lung cancer. It was 5 centimeters. My local doctors wanted to do radiation and chemo. The American Lung Association directed me to a doctor in New York City who insisted that we take it out right away. I was very lucky it didn't go anywhere. It just stayed in my lung. But as a precaution, we did 3 months of chemotherapy. The surgery, of course, is no walk in the park, but compared to chemotherapy totally disabled my life. I have numbness from the surgery, but I feel so lucky. I don't have any bad side effects. I mean, my breathing, I can't do a stair climb, but that doesn't keep me from doing stairs. Nothing has stopped me from doing what I used to do. I just might not do it as fast as I used to do it. If I was ever in need of doing chemotherapy again, I don't think I would do it. It affected me physically and mentally because I couldn't accept that it was killing everything else. It was killing, if there were any cancer cells that it was attacking, it was also attacking my bones and my blood, and I just, my quality of life, there was no quality of life. And I did it once, but I'm also convinced that I'll never have cancer again. Cancer has not consumed my life. I had it taken out, I had treatments, and in my opinion, I don't have it, and I don't say I'm in remission. I just don't have cancer anymore. I would like very much for the stigma of lung cancer, is it me? There's such a stigma. I was an ex-smoker. I had stopped smoking for 11 years. And the first thing everyone says is, did you smoke? I don't think any other cancer people ask a question, how did you get it? If I didn't smoke, the first thing I would say to people is, I got lung cancer and I never smoked. I think it's an unnecessary question for someone to ask. It puts the smoker, the ex-smoker, in a position where they feel people are looking down on them, like they caused their own illness. When I started smoking, no one told me that there was a chance of lung cancer. And it's an addiction just like any other addiction. So I hope eventually the stigma comes off of it, and I hope there's more open dialogue about lung cancer, because most people think that you die immediately. You have lung cancer, you're going to die. And to me, that's not the case. I had wonderful doctors. I had wonderful family support, which you have to have a lot of support around you. But there is a financial burden that, I was going to the oncology office every single day to be hydrated. So I had to pay a copay. My bill was $5,000 just for copays. And that plays on your mind, especially when they're asking, for more money. So there's a lot of things that are going on. Besides, for me, I felt like I was dead. I felt like I didn't have any life. I was so happy after surgery. I came home, I went for a walk, I resumed, but the chemo just completely, and as I said before, I don't know if I'd ever do it again, because the quality of life is far more important to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denise. We'll go on with Karen.
Okay, so I was first diagnosed 7 years ago, and I am no longer under any treatment for my lung cancer. With my initial diagnosis, as I said before, I was a stage 1A. It was a supposedly incidental finding, although I probably had the paraneoplastic syndrome associated with, which helped find it. I had a surgical resection. Being a physician, and my husband's a physician, we did a lot of searching to try to find out whether I should receive adjuvant chemotherapy or radiation at that time. And I had two opinions, and along with the literature, agreed that I should have been a surgical cure and did not require any further treatment. So I was on the every 4-month CAT scan at that point, which is another point that I'd like to make a little bit later in the follow-up treatment of lung cancer, which is sadly, it varies from person to person. So I was on an every 4-month follow-up, which I'm very grateful for, because 12 months after my surgery, I had a completely clean CAT scan. 4 months later, I had a 2-centimeter nodule, lymph node in my mediastinum. So I had a mediastinal recurrence, and it was a skip metastasis, which is very rare. But I had a skip metastasis to my mediastinum, and now I'm a 3A. When that happened, I knew that I was in for the fight of my life, and I looked at my doctor and I said, "Hit me with everything you have. I'm 48. I'm healthy." At that point, I was going to spinning class regularly. And I was in very, very good shape, and I just said, "Hit me with everything you have." And he said, "We're going to hit you with everything, including the kitchen sink." Because along with this panel, my treatment options were very, very limited at that point. So this is 6 years ago. And although targeted therapy was around at that point, I couldn't really get anybody to check me for any of the biomarkers because I was a 3A, I wasn't a 4. And I did eventually talk them into it, and I am epidermal growth factor receptor positive, because I said if this ever recurs a third time, I want to be able to start treatment immediately and not have to wait for the results to come back. So what they hit me with was 12 weeks of carboplatin and Taxotere. I followed with a second thoracotomy, mediastinal resection, and then I had 7.5 weeks of radiation and cisplatin. So they did hit me with everything. And I was prepared mentally for the fight, and I did fairly well until the radiation and chemo combined were pretty hard. I'm going to say that after that, I started to fight my way back, and 11 months after I concluded treatment, I walked my first marathon. I used to run. I don't run anymore. I can't because of the shortness of breath and such, but I do walk, and I've walked, since that time, I've walked 4 marathons and 6 half marathons, all with Team Lung Love. With Lung Cancer Alliance. I just feel that I have to do that for all the people who can't participate like that. Is it easy? No, it's hard. But you know what? I walk with my husband and my sister, and they give me encouragement, and I feel that I'm better for it. It gives me a lot of opportunity to reflect and to talk, and I'm just I'm glad that I'm able to do that. I would like to comment on. So for the FDA and for anybody out there, I think that we have a couple issues. First of all, treatment options. Currently, targeted therapy is for late stage. 3A does not fall into late stage. You have to be 3B or 4. There really isn't that much research for early stage. I'm not sure, there are side effects. I understand that. The chemo is very hard, and there are side effects for it. However, I would like to know if, I am epidermal growth factor receptor positive, should I have continued on any targeted therapy? I don't know, because there isn't research. So I think that would be one thing I'd like to comment on. The other thing I'd like to comment on is the follow-up. Again, I was very fortunate in that my doctor chose to do every 4-month CAT scans. I have known people who were on the 6-month, and when they went back for their 6-month CAT scan, already had metastasis to the other lung. And we are treating the tumor marker positive as if it's the old-fashioned type of lung cancer. Has changed over the years. As a physician, I'll tell you, it is not the old-fashioned lung cancer. It is there is a more aggressive style of lung cancer. It's hitting 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, and it's very, very aggressive. And so if we continue to do follow-up care as if it's the old-fashioned lung cancer, we are going to have people develop metastasis in 6 months, and they're going to be stage 4 before we have any option to treat them. So we need to consider follow-up. I have met people who are getting follow-ups at 1 year out after surgery for stage 1A. It's inexcusable, but I have to say that as a physician, the medical community is as ignorant to the facts as the general population. I have met many physicians and nurses who feel the same way as the general population, that they don't understand lung cancer. They don't understand the stigma attached to lung cancer. And I also, this will take me into my next comment about smoking and lung cancer. My first, when I received my call from my nurse case manager from my insurance company after my first surgery, the first question out of her mouth was, how should we begin your tobacco cessation program? That was the first thing she said to me. And I said, well, you can start it any way you want, but I never smoked, but don't talk about that anyway. So as a physician, I can say that I'm opposed to smoking. I'm not opposed to smokers. I feel that you have to help them. Most people begin smoking in their teenage years. When they're 15, 16, they get their first job, and they want to be with their other coworkers and such, and so they take their smoking breaks and they go out, and they become addicted very, very fast. And, you know, although at 18 we think we know everything, and at 20 we're sure we know everything, most of us in this room will say that we really don't know anything until we're in our 30s. And so by the time somebody hits 30, if they've been smoking for 20 years, they have a significant smoking history. It is not their fault that they became addicted as teenagers to this. The tobacco industry created this to become an addiction product. So we need to think about this. I had this discussion with some physicians recently about smoking, and I said, you don't realize that 60% of people with lung cancer are those who already quit smoking. And so as physicians, we're giving our patients advice and telling them, you quit smoking and all will be rosy. And then we're not following up with any screening or testing. That is inexcusable. So we have people who have quit, we have people who are still smoking, and we have never smokers. And we need to treat them all equally. We need to do early screening. Everybody deserves early diagnosis and adequate treatment, whether they are smokers or non-smokers. And that's what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Can we move to John, please?
Yeah, good morning. My name is John Ryan. As I said earlier in my intro, I had no visibility to this 9 weeks ago. I went into an emergency room at my doctor's direction due to a self-induced coughing up of about a teaspoon of blood and phlegm. The emergency room did their normal checks, and my x-ray showed nothing. If it wasn't for a radiologist said we need a CT scan, I'd be still wandering around in the dark on this. In the ensuing weeks, I was informed by a very capable oncologist saying that you're in stage 4. We can treat you, we cannot cure you, this will kill you. And depending on how lucky you are with our pathology, if you have some positive mutations, you get to go oral and directed. If that's not the case, we need to get moving into chemotherapy. Had my first chemotherapy injection last Monday, and after reading everything that the Cancer Institute put out about side effects, there's a very detailed account about all the side effects with chemotherapy. I was energized to the nines, waiting for everything to hit. In fairness to the process, the advances that were made on treating my situation where I have had this spread to a rib, and they're looking at major bone strengthening things through injections of bone enhancement, taking medication for that. Getting an overkill on everything that could make you avoid the bucket brigade of 30 years ago with nausea and vomiting. Taking medication B12 to offset maybe the fatigue. Folic acid. I didn't decide I was going to take this. The team did, and here we are on day 12. It is my greatest concern as a patient, and believe me, and my family, since you can't cure, what are the options for treatment? I went through a double or a second opinion verification through Bethesda and then Vanderbilt with Dr. Powell, and my family is at peace knowing that they both concluded that I didn't have positive EGFR or ALK, and that where I am is where I need to be. I see evening news marketing of great things that are happening in Cancer Center on the genomes, the directed. Research has put us to the Foundation 1. We would like to see that product. I asked both oncology teams in Tennessee and Bethesda, would that product today of me and my genetic molecular profile be helpful to you today as a potential assistance on what treatments might augment my first line or second line and beyond? And both said yes. My discussions here would suggest, with others, would suggest that we're not ready to do that, because although you may have a lot of matchable pairs, so what? What are the possibility links to viable clinical trials that may help? So my voice in the dark is be sensitive to the patient that's out there that is gripping for access to the viable treatments that are available to enhance the life and make the best shot for the finish. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We'll move with Shelly next.
Thank you. And I want to thank the FDA for hosting this meeting and for listening to patients and patient advocates and their perspectives to help inform the drug review and approval process. We really appreciate your listening to us, and I just want to thank all the patients who have shared their stories here today. I'm not a lung cancer patient, but my organization advocates for patients of all types of cancer for quality care. But I want to share the story of my father-in-law, who made a different decision from what we've heard today. He was diagnosed very recently with small cell lung cancer. He has made the decision not to undergo any treatment, any disease-directed treatment. And he and his wife are both very at peace with this decision. He turned 79 last month, or as he likes to say, he's in his 80th year. And he has advanced emphysema. He's lost a significant amount of weight in the last year and can't keep weight on despite his best efforts. He's frequently out of breath and tires easily. He lives in rural central Texas and would have to travel about 3 hours to Austin or Dallas for treatment. He told me he doesn't want to spend the money and the time undergoing treatments that may or may not help reduce his cancer burden, but will certainly make him feel worse and will not address his emphysema. He would rather enjoy his peaceful life for as long as he can. As his disease progresses, he will have supportive care to alleviate his symptoms and ensure he's comfortable. It is not one single factor, but the combination of factors, the effectiveness of the treatments, the side effects, the cost, the inconvenience, and his overall health status that influence his decision. That said, if there were treatments that were likely to save his life, he probably would go through the treatment. But knowing what he has in front of him, he's made this choice. And after contemplation and discussion with his doctor. But the truth is, it wasn't a terribly difficult decision for him. He is a man who knows what he wants, and this is what he wants. So it's not the right choice for everyone, but it is the right choice for him. Another example of a gentleman who worked with NCCS for several years after he was diagnosed with lung cancer in his 20s. And his name is Dan Wager, and I didn't have the pleasure of knowing him, but I've heard so much about him from my colleagues. He just had an insatiable appetite for life and was willing to try anything. And he went through 5 lines of treatment, very difficult treatment, especially at the end. He was engaged to be married. He wanted to do whatever he could to help cancer patients. And that's why he worked for NCCS through his entire treatment. So, while we can never know what we would do until we're faced with that decision, I think that I would probably take the route that Dan did. I have 3 young children, and if I were diagnosed, I would do anything to try to be there for them. But I think that, my father-in-law and Dan are probably extreme examples of where the decision is a little bit more clear-cut. It wasn't a hard decision for my father-in-law, and I don't think it was a hard decision for Dan to do whatever he could. But for other patients, the decision may not be so straightforward, and that I think that's where the trade-offs and that are discussed in this panel and that have been discussed earlier become so important. All patients that are diagnosed with lung cancer need to clearly understand the short and long-term goals of treatment and whether the treatment is curative or palliative. If the goal is not curative because of the disease burden and limited treatment options, patients need to understand the risks and benefits of whatever choice they make. The treatments chosen by lung cancer patients should follow an episode of clear communication and shared decision-making with their physicians. That should result in a clearly communicated written treatment plan that addresses the following questions. If cure is possible, what are the late and long-term effects of treatment? We've heard a lot about some of those effects of treatment today. If cure is not likely, is there a clinical trial that might offer an increased benefit over currently available treatment? If cure is not likely, will chemotherapy or other modalities help delay tumor progression and relieve symptoms? And then, does the physician understand what quality of life means to the patient and which of the possible treatment options might best preserve those qualities of life? And I think that last question is really important. It's often suggested that cancer patients have an exceptionally high tolerance for treatment side effects, but they have to be considered with respect to that individual's preferences. And this may sound obvious, but it's really not obvious. We hear countless stories of people who, like the piano teacher who, despite talking to his physician about his profession, went through a treatment regimen that resulted in peripheral neuropathy and compromised his ability to do what he loved and what his profession was teaching piano. So as the range of treatment options increases, as new drugs are being developed, the comparison of different treatment options and the potential for benefit and the risks are critical for patients to understand. And we know that the FDA is working to develop a benefit-risk framework that will help patients to be able to see the different treatment options compared against each other. And we think this is helpful and important for patients because patients, we need to understand and be able to make what's the best treatment choice for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shelly. And finally, we have Stephanie.
Thank you. My name is Stephanie Haney, as I said. My life has been, since lung cancer, has been relatively easy in comparison to many lung cancer patients. I'm about 5.5 years into this journey, and except for some pain in my right side that led to this 2-year search for a source, I've been symptom-free. I was diagnosed at stage 4, so common practice dictated that my only option was drug therapies, no surgery, no radiation. And I'm clearly blessed that those drug therapies have had a positive impact in my case. I live and have lived since the start with essentially stable disease and no symptoms. That all being said, those therapies did not come without a price. I had traditional chemo, which I thought might kill me all on its own. And that was without nausea or vomiting. That was all the other things, bone pain and that kind of thing. It was the most difficult time in my life, and I thought the end was near. Tarceva came with the expected side effects, red and rashy face and diarrhea for 3 years. Now I'm on Xalkori because I have the ALK mutation. So it was interesting that both of those drugs worked for me. Interestingly, it doesn't appear that I really have side effects at all. I'm so grateful that I happen to be chemo responsive and will just have to string therapy upon therapy together as one wears out its usefulness. I've dealt with issues such as frequent traveling to appointments. For instance, I almost missed trick-or-treating with my then 2- and 4-year-old daughters early in this process. And it was so devastating because then I assumed my time would be so short. I wasn't sure I'd be there for the next Halloween. Lots of miles on the car and lost work hours. Research, blood work that has transformed my beautiful firm veins into elusive invisible rolling strings that require steps of prep with every stick. And piles of paperwork rivaled only by the IRS are nothing if they will keep me going. But I'm willing to pay any price to stay alive. It's easy for me because I'm young and otherwise healthy, and I have 2 little girls. There are so many more like me than most might know. I would love to have more aggressive treatments that would really whack this cancer back. I would endure any amount of bone pain and utter exhaustion, painful acne, or 3 more years of diarrhea, surgeries, hospitalizations, whatever it would take. I'm a single mother with 2 young daughters, and I will do what I must to fulfill that responsibility. The reality is this: there were few decisions to be made in regard to treatment. In fact, I'm not sure I made any, really. There are a few trade-offs for me, because there are so few treatments available. Maybe 4 to 6 options. I mean, some are similar to others, so once you use one, you kind of rule another one out. And that's if you can live that long. So again, I've been fortunate that so far stringing together these therapies is working. And don't think that I'm one to just blindly accept what my doctor says, because I did do a lot of research. But when it came down to it, only having drug therapy options, I wasn't choosing between apples and oranges, but apples and apples. So I took my trusted doctor's advice without much question. Risks associated with the medication are irrelevant because they all have very serious side effects. We are monitored closely and will die without it anyway. I'm on my 3rd therapy to try to hold the inevitable off, and I know what 2 drugs will follow this. Beyond that, I'm not sure if there will be more options. That's my only concern. What happens when I use everything up? We'll string together what is out there. If the next big thing comes out before I die, I'll string that one on too. There aren't really choices for me. Just hope that there will be enough options that work to get more years of parenting in. If treatments were more reliable and had longer impact, there would be decisions to make. But with the exception of some of the newer targeted therapies that may fit one patient better than another, we're just trying to make it through. I did also want to comment on something that was said earlier about drugs with small benefit. And I'm always sensitive to that idea because basically to me, and I'm not a statistician or a scientist, what that means is, if they say it's 2 months overall survival, that's still an average. And so for some, that drug may have worked wonderfully, and for others, of course, it didn't work at all, and then you go off it. So I'm sensitive to drugs that fall off quickly because their overall survival was minimal, when in fact, probably for some, they might have been a very powerful drug. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I want to thank all the panelists. I mean, as with the first panel, it takes a lot of courage. This is a tough subject, and I think we should applaud these panelists too for their courage in coming with me. So thank you. And I'm going to start with the second question I asked to start the last facilitated discussion, which is, how many of you here in the audience saw your own experiences and at least one of the experiences shared here today? Okay. Anyone who is going to have a completely different experience? Okay. So there were a lot of common themes that were talked about, and a lot of, we talked about the obvious decisions. I'll put the obvious in quotes. We talked about the very hard decisions, may not do it again, the decisions that why you might fight for everything, why you might decide that you want to, that the end is near and you want to continue as best you can, knowing that. We talked about the lack of options and the limited options and the not having many choices. And so I think we're going to follow up on all of those. But to put it in context, I'd like to ask ask one polling question. So if you can get your clickers out, and on the web, if you can answer this polling question too. And that is, have you ever undergone any of the following cancer treatments to help reduce or control the spread of your lung cancer, and include your current treatments? So chemotherapy, radiation therapy, surgery to remove the tumor or any part of the lung, targeted drug therapies, something else, or if you have not undergone any cancer treatments, or if you're not sure. And choose all that apply. I think that button works. I think you can choose more than one. Okay, looks like folks are done. Okay, if we can move on. Okay. So it looks like we have a wide range of perspectives, a little bit of everything, except no one here has not undergone any treatments. And I think that that is important to acknowledge, that the discussion here today may not be fully representative of the whole population. So especially for those of you on the web, or for the advocates, or when you talk to your peers, to submit to the docket those perspectives. Okay. And on the web, can we just know what the most common was, or were they all generally mentioned?
All very similar in response, with the most being chemotherapy.
Okay. 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 So we want to talk about some of those, and I'll turn my colleagues to see at some point to make sure that we've covered the sort of the major benefits you see and the downsides you see of these treatments. And I suppose we'll take each one in turn. Let's start with chemotherapy. Understanding that we talked a lot about this in the first discussion, so if there's something, we don't need to elaborate on specific things from that. But maybe if you think about these treatments that you're on, what might be surprising to FDA to know about, that you see as a benefit of a particular treatment? And it can be not just how effective that treatment is, but other aspects of the treatment that you think are very beneficial, and similarly the downsides. So with chemotherapy, is there anything that anyone would like to highlight as the real a benefit or a good thing about the chemotherapy, generally speaking? Oh, no. Maybe not. Yes.
Well, I mean, the obvious benefit of chemotherapy is it keeps the cancer from recurring, or it shrinks the tumor. So you have to mention that.
Mm-hmm. Point taken. Let's move on to, yes, go ahead, Karen.
I'd just like to comment, so the chemotherapy, and again, I had significant amount. In my research, what I believed was drinking a lot of water, and even though I was nauseous, so whenever I wasn't nauseous, which wasn't often, I would just drink as much water as I could. And so although I had 2 platinum agents, I never bumped my BUN and creatinine. And I'm, I think that had a lot to do with the fact that I didn't maybe have as much trouble with, even though I had very, significant chemotherapy, I didn't have it. And it's not impressed upon patients as much. I talk to a lot of patients about making sure that they drink water, and whenever they're not sick. And I think that's something that should be brought out, that I think that it's very, very important, and that, tea and coffee and soda and such is not the same, and that we really should be asking our patients to drink a lot more water when they're getting these very toxic agents.
Okay. Are there any downsides to the treatment that haven't been mentioned that you think might be surprising to FDA about chemo that you want to highlight here? Yeah, Montessa?
I know they probably know this, but cisplatin, the hearing loss, because I had, terrible ringing in my ears, and they actually had to switch me to carboplatin because of the, and I still have some ringing in my ears at times from the cisplatin.
Is the ringing in the ears, we didn't mention that as a symptom. If you feel comfortable raising your hand, has anyone experienced that as well? Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, Denise.
I have the ringing in my ears, but I have lost hearing.
Okay.
Yeah. And I wasn't aware of it until just recently.
Anything else about the downsides or about chemotherapy that you want to highlight? My colleagues, do you have any specific questions about that? Yes, you can.
No, I don't have a question. I just wanted to follow-up comment on Karen. She had raised the question that, I don't know whether I should have continued the targeted therapies or not, and that there has been nothing done about it. I just wanted to mention that there is going to be NCI-driven protocols where they are going to actually patients who have had resected lung cancer and will be checked with the targeted, if they have targeted, abnormalities, then they will be given a maintenance therapy. So that is coming. I also wanted to mention that, again, on your comment, is that there had been a long delay in the research for lung cancer, and that delay has been because of the stigma that has been attached to it. For many years, there was really decades nothing going on in the research, and we don't have survivors, so we do not have any going to the hill and asking for research money. And when I started working for lung cancer patients, I remember that a few years ago that even my colleagues would say, well, we don't feel sorry for your patients because that they did it to themselves. But it really took a while for people to realize that was, there are 20% of the patients who have never smoked, and as you mentioned, more than 60% have quit smoking and they develop lung cancer. So again, I am very happy, and we are all from FDA very happy that now that we do have research going on and we do have a lot of focus on lung cancer. So what your question is, that it will be hopefully shortly answered.
Yes, Lauren.
One perspective from one of the patients was that she had gone through 2 rounds of chemo before her mutation changed, and she finally got that genetic test that made a difference, and now she's completely clear after stage 4. So the genetic testing is really important, that it maybe happens before people go through all those rounds of chemo and make that happen, although the cost of that is for a future discussion.
The cost will be outside the scope of our discussion today. Let's talk about the targeted therapies and see if you want to comment on your thoughts, your experiences, perspectives on those. For those of you who had tried those, we heard some from the panel, but I know others out here have done that. You want to raise any, what you've seen as maybe less obvious of the benefits of those targeted therapies for you?
I would say probably the biggest benefit is that the side effects probably aren't as bad as traditional chemo, except that there's no end date. We're on targeted chemotherapy every day, basically, for the remainder of our lives until we stop responding to that drug. So it's not where chemotherapy ends and then our energy comes back and we don't have diarrhea anymore. So I just wanted to point that out. I don't know how many people are realize that it's an ongoing treatment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Susan. Anyone else want to make any comments about the targeted therapies? Any follow-up questions? Okay. Let's take anything about treatments. I want to make sure we get on to other topics. Anything about treatments that you'd like to say? So we have Kathleen, and then over there.
Myself and the people that I represent, several of them have said that they would, decisions about what kind of treatments that you're going to make change, depending on how the treatment affects you, depending on whether it's functional, whether it's shrinking the tumors. And that has happened not so much with these people who responded, but people who we have known who have lost their struggle. And various people, the side effects differ, even with the same chemotherapies. Some people will have horrible neuropathy, and some people won't have any neuropathy, and the fatigue, and that all varies. And one of the things they wonder, and one of the things we all think would be beneficial is, in addition to typing the tumor, is it so that you know how the particular tumor is going to respond to the chemotherapy agent? Is it possible to get other genetic information so that you have a better idea of what the side effects are going to be for these various chemotherapies, so that you can make a decision before you suffer some of these horrible side effects? And that is a focus of research and a focus of medication that people would very much like to see.
Okay. There. And do you state your name? Because I forgot it.
Thank you. It's Donna. And I'd like to address the surgery to remove the tumors. In our case, our daughter that was 26, because doctors were not educated and because of her young age of being diagnosed, they were taking her lung. Because I am adamant about getting second opinions, and we got that from Mayo Clinic, her lung was saved, and they removed just the tumor. Her outcome of life at age 26 is very different with them just removing the tumor while she has chronic pain and other issues, versus what her outcome would have been if they would have taken her entire right lung. And so I think the type of surgery and education, and not, again, looking at the fact that because she was not a smoker and because she was so young, that this was not a possibility for her. Education and just understanding that this disease is hitting more and more young people every day. She has met online through chats several other women who at the same age have this same diagnosis with no explanation. There is not a precursor for her having an atypical type of cancer. She didn't smoke, she wasn't around any chemicals, there's nothing there. And so I think doctor education and also patient education to understand what is right for the patient when it comes to the surgery and removal of the tumor.
Okay. Thank you, Donna. We'll be getting into more of the considerations on decision making, so you'll have plenty of time to do that. Andrea, do you have something about a treatment?
Andrea Ferris from Longevity Foundation. So I'm here both as a patient advocate, but also as a caregiver. My mother passed away 5 years ago from lung cancer. And her treatment decisions were largely driven by the doctor, but she did participate in clinical trials. And I think John mentioned, and Stephanie, you did as well. Many of our members that we represent, similar to yourselves, have very, very similar stories where they're willing to undergo anything to make it to that next treatment. I think that I was having a dialogue during the break. I think that this has somewhat changed since crizotinib has been approved, because you do see people who have been through multiple lines of therapy, and then all of a sudden they were tested for a mutation and now their lives have transformed. So this has inspired people who are undergoing treatments and survivors to hang on to that next one, because they too might have that mutation or that gene. And so I think that the trade-off between what you're willing to endure in order to reach that silver bullet, that dynamic has changed in recent years. And so just take that into consideration as well when doing the whole risk-benefit trade-offs of what really is a benefit and what really is a risk. The other thing with that is the clinical trial paradigm. Many people talk about you can't enroll patients in clinical trials. Well, when 85% of your patients are diagnosed stage 4 with brain mets and distant metastases, they don't qualify. So how can we change? Because there is great medicine going on out there. I mean, we've seen now 12 known mutations have druggable targets if you have one of them. And if you're not you don't have a mutation, there's immunotherapies coming out. There's a lot of great science out there for lung cancer that didn't exist 5 years ago. But how can we get more patients to have access to that? And is there a way of changing the clinical trials, and this might be a topic for different discussion, such that you can enroll high-risk patients in a satellite trial that doesn't influence the registration trial, so that industry is more apt to allow these patients onto the clinical trial as well?
Pat, would you like to follow up?
So I do want to clarify. Often the very early trials try and get a homogeneous population of patients. just so they can do the right dose finding studies and determine that. But beyond that, there really is no restriction other than that which are necessary to be able to address the question. So we actually do have trials ongoing with patients with brain metastases. And I think that there's really no barrier to that other than the barrier of what the drug developer might want to do. So there's not any regulatory barrier to that.
Oh, then it's a practice, because that's very different than many of our constituents are faced with, where they're told repeatedly they're not eligible.
No,
So
no,
I think
they
it's
may not be eligible for a particular trial, but that is not because of a regulatory barrier, and it may be an educational effort that needs to be undertaken.
Yeah.
There is no reason why those patients can't be studied. I think there's a lot more openness, particularly now as we get to some of the targeted therapies that we know cross blood-brain barrier and other places, to do that. So that's not really an issue. I also wanted to bring up, and I don't know if Tika is still here, that the issue about differences in toxicity and side effects and things like that, that there is a focus on evaluating patients and how patients handle and metabolize drugs in order to determine whether or not there are optimal ways of dosing them to avoid side effects if possible. And there's also a lot of information on drug interactions, which are probably even a bigger issue for when patients are exposed to a higher dose than necessary. But one of the things is whether or not people are paying attention to those efforts as we try and describe that in product labeling. So maybe one of the issues that could be brought in to the docket on this is, to what extent do we need better educational efforts to talk to prescribers about looking at those aspects of product labeling to make sure that they're using drugs optimally? And is there a need to look into that, to educate further on that, so that optimal dosing is provided for patients? Because I think that may be helpful as well.
Thank you, Pat. I can see that the conversation is going quickly into the decision-making aspects of it, and that is important. It's important for FDA, and I can see that it is very important for you. So I'm going to keep us going and move on so we can get to that topic, because we have to do these polling questions in order. So I have to ask the next one. It's a very important question. So save your comment, Susan, and we'll come back to it. So we talked about treatments. I think we got a lot about the specific good and bad of the treatments. One thing we wanted to know was, if we can go to the next polling question, is besides your cancer treatments, we wanted to just get a sense of what other therapies you have taken or are currently taking to manage any symptoms that you experience because of your lung cancer or because of your lung cancer medications. Pain medications, steroids, supplemental oxygen, breathing, exercise, or relaxation techniques, dietary supplements or other diet changes, complementary or alternative therapies, something else that's not mentioned, or you're not doing anything to treat symptoms. And for those of you who had more symptoms in the past, think about what you did in the past. Yes. Oh, okay, yeah. Check, get another clicker. And while you're thinking about this, to foreshadow, we'll highlight just a few of the most important ones. What we would like to know, generally, are these therapies helping your symptoms? Are they addressing the symptoms? And then we'll follow up with a question about what symptoms are still remaining that are most significant that you would like to see, in your experience, better managed for yourself. So with that, we'll move on to the results of this. Okay. Looks like that there's, again, a wide range, lots of things being taken, particularly pain medications, steroids, breathing techniques, the dietary supplements, and the complementary medicines as well. Okay, and on the web, do we have it generally the same, different?
The two top that are neck and neck is breathing and relaxation and dietary supplements, and then following pain medications.
Okay. So I think we're hearing about a lot of non-drug therapies being tried here. Would anyone like to highlight something that hasn't been yet mentioned that is really working for them? We've talked about water. We've talked about getting the rest. Anything else that's really working? Yeah.
I'd just like to comment on after my surgery, my second surgery, at that point I had read about yoga, and I knew a yoga instructor who, it was a gentle yoga, not like hot, serious yoga, but like a gentle yoga, and yoga improves pulmonary function, and so I did yoga. I started yoga 3 weeks post-op and did it until I was able to do it on my own, and I think that's a beneficial thing for people who are undergoing any kind of pulmonary issues. We know that yoga improves pulmonary function, but you have to be careful that you go to the right yoga instructor, and that it's someone that you can trust. Maybe talk to a lot of different people, but it is good.
Thank you, Karen. Anyone else? Lauren?
So one patient, the first time they went through chemo, they did acupuncture after their chemo, and then the next time around, they did it before their chemo. And they noticed a huge difference in side effects and how they felt going through chemotherapy when they did their acupuncture right before their shot versus after.
And that's for pain management.
All of their side effects were improved.
Anyone else? Yes, Denise.
I think it's a mind-body connection. I think I may be in a Pollyanna state, but by saying I don't have cancer, I'm not going to have cancer, I think it helps. I also think just the basics, getting rest, eating properly, exercise, and just not giving in. I've learned to say no, which has been very hard for me. It's really taking care of yourself. It's not being selfish. You're taking care of yourself. And people appreciate you more once you do that.
Thank you, Denise. Oh, yes, Marie.
I'm Karen's mother, and I see something that's missing, a positive attitude in just, being happy, as happy as you can be. We're living today, and we're going to get better because she had a positive attitude and worked hard. So I think that's one of the good things.
Thank you, Marie. So let's talk about then the symptoms that remain, that aren't being addressed as well as you would like in your experience. And on the web, I'm going to put a call out for this too. If you'd like to answer this question, we'll try to summarize this after the public comment period. Is there anything that still remains that you wish you could, in your experience, have had better managed? Karen?
So, yeah, I have a symptom that I still have now that's really a little frustrating to me. I believe it's due to the radiation. I have excessive mucus, and it's produced predominantly if I'm exposed to cigarette smoke. So I have to hold my breath if I'm near smokers. But it's really, I was doing a medical mission in Haiti, and there were some other people there, and one of them was smoking outside the sleeping quarters. And in the middle of the night, I woke up feeling like I was going to drown. And so I've spoken to my radiation oncologist and different people about treatment for this, and he said I could use a steroid inhaler, but it probably really, and I tried it, it didn't help. And so I'm 5.5 years out, and I still have this, and people who are around me know that if I'm exposed to it, I feel like I can't breathe. I just literally feel like I'm drowning in mucus, and it doesn't seem to be anything for that. So I'm kind of learning to live with that, but it is a problem that I've talked to other people and they have a similar symptom.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Yes. Go ahead, Sheila.
Yeah, just
I just thought of this and I've forgotten about it. But on the 2 surgeries I had, they were both on my right side. And they were same incision, same everything, same doctor, same hospital. It was really kind of bizarre. But on both occasions, and with this surgery, you're like this during the 3 or 4 hour surgery. And on both occasions, no one thought to say, you know, your shoulder's going to hurt. and a steroid shot will really help. And it was just this old doctor who I happened to meet at a party, actually. I told him I just couldn't get rid of this pain in my shoulder. He said, all you need is a steroid shot. And it was like a miracle. So anyone going out for surgery, please tell them to give you a steroid shot afterwards.
I see a lot of laughs and head nods. Is this the experience shared by others? Okay. Anyone else want to talk about something that's not being addressed? My colleagues, if there's any, before we move on to the sort of considerations on decision making, anything about these symptomatic treatments that you want to ask?
I had a question about specifically the steroids. Do you ever feel like the dose of steroids is too high and you'd like to titrate that dose down?
Okay. Okay. Lauren, do you want to explain?
Well, it's not much of an explanation, but to a T, it was, I hate steroids.
Kathleen?
Well, and I'll have the counterpoint to that, which was I don't know if they could have been lower, and I did have side effects from them, but I know I, too, threw the kitchen sink with chemotherapy at my cancer, and they helped me tremendously with some of the other side effects.
All right, let's move on to talk about focusing on that decision making. We've alluded to many points, and we'll be revisiting those. So we want to hear your perspective and experience with regard to your decisions, and we heard such courageous decisions explained up here. So I'm going to pose a general question about when thinking about your. You know what? I'm going to stop that. I'm going to go to the polling question, because I think we'll get to hear all the factors at once, and then we can address this trade-offs question. So on the web and in here, this is a very important question. There are many factors that go into the decision, and we put 6 up here that FDA is particularly interested in understanding how they factor into your decisions. So of the following factors, which 2 would you rank as most important to your decisions about using treatments to help reduce or control the spread of your lung cancer? And as you think about it, you've made many decisions and you'll make future decisions. So you can think about this sort of generally as the 2 factors that would or have or are factoring most into your decisions. Whether the treatment is expected to help relieve the symptoms that you experience, whether there's a small but significant risk of serious side effects, such as blood clots or kidney failure that could lead to hospitalization or even death. How long the treatment would probably prolong my life, so there we're talking about what's expected to happen. How long the treatment could possibly prolong my life, so for longer than expected. What are the expected side effects of the treatment, such as nausea, loss of appetite, etc. And all sorts of things about how the treatment is administered, such as how long the treatment takes, if you have to take it for the rest of your life, or whether it requires hospitalization, doctor visits, etc. I know this is a hard question to throw at you. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just for discussion purposes. Okay. All right, so let's go on. How long the treatment would probably prolong my life is the most raised thing. Although they were all mentioned except how the treatment is administered. and the small but significant risks of serious side effects. Can I ask Andrea on the phone what the most common ones were?
The two most common that were equal was how long the treatment would probably prolong my life and how long the treatment could possibly prolong my life, or longer than expected.
Okay. All right. And so we can keep this in, so we'll keep this in mind. I have a, Chad, if we go to the next question, will we be able to come back to this one and look at the answers? Okay, so we can go back and look at the answers. So then let's ask the next question, just so we have the full context. And of those same factors, which one would you rank as least important to your decision about using treatments to help reduce or control the spread of your cancer? Your lung cancer. Yes, Kathleen. To eliminate, well, we have to leave it so you can just, how the treatment is administered.
Can I reword this?
Yes.
Number 6. So instead of saying how long the treatment is, I would also ask the question whether it's oral or IV. Will that make a difference? Or going to the doctor every 3 weeks to get the IV treatment versus taking a pill and going home and coming and seeing doctor once a month or something like that. Just keep that in mind when you are answering that question.
Okay. So let's leave the question as is, but then we can come back and talk about what the next one would be for you if that one is your least important. Okay, we're still getting some responses, so we'll. Okay, I think that's the same number we had last time. Okay. So overwhelmingly, number 6, how the treatment is administered, although we do have some indication that the other ones are taken into account, whether the treatment is expected to help relieve symptoms, the risk of side effects, and the risk of serious side effects, and those expected side effects, the more common ones. Okay. And on the web, Andrea?
Very similar.
Okay. All right. So let's go back to those most important ones. Can we don't need to come back to this finding, but can we go back to the previous one? Okay, it doesn't give the findings. There we go. This is all new technology that we're trying out here, so does anyone want to explain their response? Yes.
I'll just say on the forms that I got back, the questions that people answered, they did address that they would want to know what the very serious but small likelihood side effects would be, but overwhelmingly it had to do with prolonging life or shrinking the tumor, which were kind of equated.
And was there anything specific about their situation that you would attribute that to? Any factors that went most into that judgment?
It was young people and older people, so no. But I mean, you've mentioned that our experiences in this room are not necessarily reflective of all lung cancer patients, and I think that's true. But I think it's true in large part for the reasons that Marie said, which is most of the people who are participating here and who are in contact with us as survivors or as support personnel are people who do have a good attitude, who do have hope. And so in that sense, it is a non-representative sample.
Okay. Then I'm not going to ask the question now, but I'm going to seed it in the minds of the advocates to think about, as you think about the people who aren't here today, how their experiences might be different. So I'm going to call on the advocates in the room as we go through the remainder of this discussion. And if you can try to pull in and keep it give that other perspective a voice as well, the other experiences. Okay. What about the trade-off, any more about the trade-off between the importance of prolonging life versus making it as comfortable as possible?
So with the patients that I talked to, two were very young, one had children, one didn't, and one was older. And really it was about, the young lady with children, it was just keep me alive to see my grandchildren. That was her whole goal. She didn't care about anything else. Just keep me alive.
Okay.
She could deal with all the side effects. She didn't care.
Is that Amy?
Just to give the perspective of another advocate who we worked with for a long time, who unfortunately passed away earlier this year. When she was dealing with her second recurrence, she had surgery, her first case of lung cancer, surgery a second time, was going through chemotherapy third time. She was unable to go through surgery again because of invasion of the chest wall, but it was still fairly localized. It hadn't spread anywhere else in her body. But she got to the point where the chemotherapy drug that she was taking was so debilitating that she couldn't get out of bed. She was in so much pain she couldn't walk. And she and her husband had plans to go on a cruise about a month or two later. So she actually made the choice to go off treatment and go into hospice because her quality of life was so bad that she wasn't even going to be able to go on this cruise with her husband. And she came to us at Lung Cancer Alliance, and she kind of said, "Is that a bad decision? I mean, and she really questioned that decision because there's so much pressure, to do whatever it takes. And she was making this choice because of quality of life, and we reassured her that it was what she felt was best for her was the important thing. And the good news is she and her husband, she was well enough to go on that cruise, and she and her husband had the most amazing time, and we got to hear about it. But it was really difficult for her to make that decision. She had gone through so much, but she literally could not get out of bed, and she wasn't living. So she had to make that choice.
Thank you very much, Amy. And I think I'm going to ask Denise also to think about this, because this is, there's a point that's being made about where maybe the factors were one way before the decision about treatment was made, and those factors shifted while you were on treatment or after you experienced treatment. And Denise raised it, now Amy's raising it. Would anyone else like to follow up on that and share an experience of themselves or someone else who had a similar experience where they discovered that their priorities might be shifting?
There was another woman in our group, and I think it is who was super optimistic, much like the person just described, and did a number of treatments and was determined to beat it. And at some point, it wasn't really working. And even though she could have kept trying different treatments, she really lost hope. And I think at some point, even the most optimistic among us have faced some sort of reality that tells you, and when you know that ultimately you're not going to be cured, that's what her decision was, to forego treatment as well. And then she gathered her family and went to the beach. Mm-hmm. And she had a wonderful, wonderful last month of life. And so, yeah, I think that decisions do change. And most people who filled out this form and said prolonging life is the most important said, but then again, if I have symptoms I can manage. If I didn't, my choice might be different.
Yeah, and I'll kind of piggyback on that a little bit too, because being on Tarceva, I live a pretty comfortable life right now, but I'd be willing to be more uncomfortable to prolong my life. But it's easy to say, I feel good until I don't feel good anymore. And then, yeah, maybe then my priorities would change, or my decisions would change.
I'm going to, go ahead, Donna.
I just wanted to bring a point that hasn't been said, and that's the patient's pressure from family members. I had a friend that died 5 weeks after diagnosis at age 74. Her children all lived out of state, so I took care of her. They came. She knew that she was dying, that they didn't catch it in time, but yet she's still undergone chemotherapy and actually had a treatment 2 days prior to her death because she didn't want to disappoint the children. And the children wouldn't let her make that decision to stop treatment and have a quality of life. And this is a woman who volunteered for the American Cancer Society for over 15 years, and was a hospice volunteer. So she understood quality versus quantity of life, and she so wanted to stop the treatments, but felt pressured from her family not to stop the treatments.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Donna. Anyone else? Yes, go ahead, Denise, and then we'll go Shelly.
It does depend on a lot of things. My children are in their 40s. My grandchildren are teenagers. So quality of life is, I don't have to worry about taking care of children anymore. I had the chemo as precaution. They told me I had no more cancer. So I was having an extremely difficult time taking chemo when I didn't have cancer anymore. So it might be different if I had cancer and that was the only cure. But I still believe in the quality of life, and extending someone's life so they can lay in bed is not something I would choose.
Shelly?
I think a couple of the points that were raised go to the importance of having supportive care along with active treatment, from the beginning. And the study by Jennifer Timmel and others a couple of years ago that showed with stage 4 lung cancer patients that having the supportive care, while it doesn't mean deciding I'm giving up and I'm not going to try to beat this, it was offered alongside the active treatment, and it both extended life and reduced some of the symptoms and improve the quality of life. So I think, though, to your point, you may have this resolve that I'm going to do whatever I can, but it's at a certain point that calculation may change, and you've had enough. And I think it's tough when a patient doesn't feel comfortable saying to their family, I've had enough, and I know what's happening, and I'm okay with it. And I think that happens too often, where patients are having, toxic treatments in the last few weeks of their life because they didn't have that supportive care and that help in the decision-making process to understand when to transition to more of just a palliative care. And that happened. My best friend died last year of kidney cancer, and 10 days before he died, he said to his oncologist, and he was a physician himself, so he understood. He said to his oncologist, I think it's time for hospice, and his oncologist said, well, I've never had a patient throw in the towel after just one line of therapy. And the man was he was in the hospital very, very sick and obviously dying, and he didn't even get the support from his oncologist that it was okay. So he did go, he had a scan a couple of days later that showed how extensive the cancer was, and he went home and had about a week at home in hospice. But he could have had a much more comfortable last few months of his life if he had better supportive care.
Thank you. From my FDA colleagues, anything about these factors that you want to know more about their thinking? Okay. Let's talk about the one, so how treatment is administered was the least raised. Is there something else on this list of the 1 through 6 that would be, that if you picked that one as the least, what would be your second least? Or for those of you who didn't pick the administration as your least, and you want to explain why one of the other factors, I don't think we get to go back to it now, but why one of the other factors on this list was not as important to you.
I would say that I think that the how treatment is administered, I mean, I think people are willing to do whatever it takes, but if we had treatments that were a little easier to administer, and especially I think in the case of my father-in-law, who I said lives in a rural area, and getting to treatment would be very challenging for him. If he had the option of an oral medicine that he could take from home, he might be more likely to consider it. So I do think it would be a factor for him. But I think, there's a lot of factors at play. I think part of it is your proximity to a medical center where you can get the treatment that you need.
What about the small but significant risk of serious side effects? Anyone want to comment on their thinking about that? What about the difference between probably prolong my life versus possibly prolong my life? Has anyone was that a consideration to them? That difference between what's expected? I know we heard about it on a panel, between what's expected and what possibly could happen, and how you thought about that? Okay. Then I think let's move on, unless anyone has anything else to say about these factors in their decision making. We have a couple scenarios that we would like to put up and explore. And this is how FDA thinks about these types of things. Can we go on to the next slide? Oh, one more slide. There's a couple scenarios, and we're just putting these up just to get your thoughts and your reactions to these types of scenarios. We're not looking for decisions to be made, but getting your thoughts will be helpful in getting your perspective as FDA thinks through these decisions. And so the first scenario is that there's a drug X. It's a chemotherapy drug being developed for patients with metastatic non-small cell lung cancer. Studied in a clinical trial comparing the standard of care chemo plus drug X versus just standard of care alone. And the clinical trial showed that the addition of drug X prolonged survival on average by 2 months. The median survival was 12 months for drug X plus standard of care versus 10 months on standard of care alone. In addition to the toxicities related to the standard of care chemo, patients treated with drug X had more diarrhea and rash and had more rare but serious toxicities, such as liver injury and lung inflammation. Is this a clear scenario? Are there any questions about the scenario? Any first reactions? Just things that come to mind as you see this, as you hear it. Lauren, I see you shaking your head, so can we? Okay.
Yeah, 2 months longer with potentially rare serious side effects, it's not enough of a trade-off.
Okay. Anyone else want to follow on this? Yes.
I just think that when my liver function went up on Tarceva, they dropped the dose down. So sometimes you can make a decision taking something, and they can make an adjustment that you don't have to have it be so clear cut.
Thank you, Ruth. Any other thoughts? Stephanie?
Yes, but half the patients got more than that 2 months. So some of them might have gotten 3 years.
Okay. Anyone want to follow up on anything else? Kathleen?
I'm with Stephanie.
Okay. You want to explain more about this? What other, any other thoughts about this to expand upon that? We'll let Deco ask a follow-up question.
I'm sorry. So I just want to add, along with those patients that may have lived 3 years longer, some of those patients actually died of liver failure and inflammatory lung disease. So it's something just to keep in mind. And of course, if you don't have that, you're happy and you're glad that you took the medicine. But if you had that side effect, and this was brought up a bunch of times, we can't predict that, unfortunately.
So what's your thinking about all of this, about how these trade-offs? Kathleen?
Well, and I could get hit by a car crossing the street, or I could choose to jump out of an airplane because I think that's something that I want to experience before I die, and my chute might not open. I mean, there are those, for me, if I'm needing that extra 2 months of life for the hope of another drug in the future, or I'm thinking I'm going to be in a smaller sample that's going to be longer, I would look at the statistics, I would look at the studies, but I would probably make that trade-off.
Andrea?
I'm just going to piggyback off of that. I think the thing, at least for a lot of our constituents, is you're already facing a fatal disease anyway, so you're going to die. It's not like you have the option of living a healthy life, but then you may die of liver failure. Your choice is dying of lung cancer or liver failure, or perhaps being in the 3-year bucket.
We have Karen. Well, first, Karen, let's let Pat ask a follow-up, please.
So we actually, because the staff worked this up, this is actually sort of a typical situation for us, and one that usually would be thought to be a positive scenario for drug acts. But I guess what might be helpful would be to know, what would you want to know about the additional toxicity? I mean, that's the typical issue. You add another drug, you get a little bit more toxicity, but maybe you get a little bit more efficacy. But what things might you want to know about that toxicity? For instance, does it require you to be hospitalized? Are you going to eat? What about that might influence your decision? Because I think, maybe as presented, it isn't coming through, but are there certain things that we should be asking that are important to patients that might have changed, whether you said, yeah, this is okay, and what of those things should we be collecting?
We'll let Karen go first.
So I agree completely with Andrea. So the thing is that, are you going to die of lung cancer? You're going to die of one of these toxicities. The thing is that you already have something very serious. The chemotherapies, the standard of care chemotherapies, have very, very serious side effects also. You could die from any one of those. But here I had a 14% 5-year survival, 6 years ago. And so, I looked at that and I just said, okay, I'm one of the 14%, and that was my attitude. I'm not one of the 86%. I'm going to be one of the 14%. Now, I'm fortunate that I was. Maybe I wouldn't have been. But to me, I look at it, there's no question to me that I would go for it, because again, it's that positive attitude. It's like, and you deal with what you're given in life. And then I agree, none of us are guaranteed tomorrow. And so, in any way, whether you have lung cancer or not. And so, now if I was 93 years old, or 100 years old, maybe I'd have a completely different attitude. But where I am right now in my life, I would say, hit me, give it to me, because maybe I'll be in that 1% that gets 3 years without any side effects.
Okay. Anyone want to follow up? And thinking also of Pat's question. Stephanie, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, one of the things I would want to know is, how will those risks be monitored? So if it's possible for liver injury, does that mean then I have blood tests for liver function? However, I'm sure some of those things you see coming, maybe some you don't, maybe some just occur and you're gone, but how is it monitored? How would you know if one of those things was developing?
Sheila.
Thank you. This is a great question, because so many patients face this. It shows the importance of having patient-friendly information on the range of possibilities from taking this drug or adding this drug to the regimen. And that information is very hard to come by. Just your comment there about the patients who had liver problems, it's a side effect, they died. I didn't know that. And I try to keep up with all the information on these drugs. But it has to be clearly spelled out. And the other missing piece of information for late-stage lung cancer patients that's very important to them is how much will it cost? Because at this point, they've drained their resources, their family's resources. They have to know who is going to tell them. Is that FDA's job to say how much it costs? I know you'll say no. Who is going to tell them? I mean, this is a difficult area.
You have Andrea?
Just to follow on to the question of how will it be monitored, I guess another key question would be, is it irreversible or is it reversible if you stop treatment? And what does that look like? Is it permanent damage or otherwise?
Well, and back to one of the points I made earlier, is there any way to know, given my larger genetic makeup, whether it's more likely to work for me?
Did you have your hand up? No. Anyone else on this scenario? I'm going to see if my colleagues have, we want to get to our public comment. And I want to see first, what follow-up, do you have any other follow-up questions about anything being asked today about the factors or anything else that you want to make sure gets asked? And while they're saying that, I'm gonna make a point about the docket. The docket on our website will be open for the next month, and we are looking into a way that we can get it to stay open for a following month, so to the end of August. So you have some time to put your thoughts together, but we really encourage you to contribute to the docket, especially if you're on the web and there are things, or you're advocates, and there are perspectives that are really important to share that we haven't heard today. Pat.
That's what I was going to ask, that if there's anything after you leave the meeting and then you say, oh, I really wish I brought this up, if you could put it in the docket, then it will be available for us to review and as you maybe think further.
Especially on the things that you think might be surprising or gray areas, things that FDA might not know about. Kathleen?
I know there are people listening to this who have no idea what a docket is.
What a docket? Okay, let me explain. Let's see if I can do it. Very fair point. The docket is, if you go on our website, there's going to be a link, and that will take you to the docket. And what the docket is, it's a vehicle, it's a bucket that you can submit, anyone in the public can submit a comment, a Word document. You can upload a Word document. When you do that, it will be submitted to the docket, as we called, and it will come to FDA. It might also, depending on some factors about personal information being conveyed, it might also be available on the website for others to see. So it's your chance to make a public statement that FDA looks at and that others might also be able to look at. And we will take all those comments when the public docket closes, when that comment period closes, and we will incorporate those into our summary report here.
Question, which is, this meeting has spurred a lot of interesting thought and discussion. Is the recording of this meeting going to be available for other people, maybe to listen to before they make their comments in the docket?
And the slides will be up, and the webcast recording will be up. The slides will be up. It takes maybe a day or two. The webcast recording will take a little bit longer. Don't quote me. But it may be a week or more for that webcast recording to be up. And eventually the transcript of this meeting will be up. That takes a little bit longer too. We have Kim in the back. Kim? Any other thoughts? Anything that is really relevant to the topic that we're discussing about the decision making that you'd like to raise? Susan?
Sarah?
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
Could I just ask a question about the docket? Can people submit links to video testimony? If they put a video on YouTube, can that URL be submitted? For
I
those who have
believe
a hard
that-
time putting things on paper.
Yes, I believe they can. If you embed that link into your comments, either into the Word document that you can upload, or if you don't have very much to say, you just maybe have a link, you don't even have to upload a document. You can go right to the web page, and in the little comment box, I believe it's there, you can make your comment and perhaps upload your document. Thanks, Kim. Susan.
I don't know if this is an appropriate time. I think it is to bring up about clinical trials that I didn't get to talk about on the panel, but I entered into a clinical trial the same time I started Tarceva, which was the only option for me to enter into that trial. And of course, I was expecting it to be the miracle drug. Unfortunately, it was not. And I also found it interesting too. My doctor just told me last week that only 3% of cancer patients are in clinical trials. Is that a pretty accurate number? Yeah. I was fortunate that the hospital where I'm being treated is just a short cab ride away from where I work, but I often wondered how I would have managed it if I needed to travel further than that during a full-time work week. Because each appointment was several hours long and a lot of times more than once a week. So besides the time commitment, my biggest concern was the exposure, the unnecessary, extensive exposure to radiation during that trial. Radiation that my doctor would not have exposed me to had I not been on the trial. So I guess it's more of a question, maybe. Can the trials be more, quote unquote, personalized, where maybe not everybody needs, I was getting a CT of the chest and a CT of the abdomen and pelvis every 6 weeks. And my doctor said that she didn't or wouldn't have ordered the CT of the abdomen and pelvis. It was not necessary. And the CT of the abdomen and pelvis is, I don't know how many of you know this, I did this in my research, is like 20,000 millisieverts, which is like getting 200 chest x-rays in a row every 6 weeks, in addition to the radiation from the chest x-ray. That put me at a calculation I found on the web. I don't know if this is that accurate, but at a 94% chance of developing an additional cancer just from that radiation from the clinical trial. So, and a little bit of input even from my doctor was, about trials needing to be, or having fewer roadblocks, where for time commitment, maybe having blood draws where they can get them closer to their homes, or having the follow-up appointments on the phone rather than having to travel into the office. And then also removing the blanket or the restrictions that prevent every hospital to be able to enter in any trial that they have qualified patients for. But just going back a little bit, is it possible to have a clinical trial that is more personalized, where your doctor maybe would have more input if there was something that could be done differently? Because not everybody's the same.
That's true that not everyone is the same, and I think that there can be flexibility in discussions about a clinical trial, but at root, the clinical trial is, not to be too crass about it, but essentially an experiment. And so in order to do it right, there has to be some level of standardization. So I think probably what really needs to be done is a discussion of what's essential and what's not essential, and working that through. So some things will be essential that it be standardized in order to be able to draw some valid conclusions at the end. A lot of that is driven by what the expectations and goals of the trial are. And other things are not as essential. So I think we're constantly striving towards what is non-essential, what could be addressed in a different way. And I think that each trial, each set of drugs, each condition is going to be different in that regards. And so it almost has to be done on a case-by-case basis. looking at what the trial and the drugs are what questions you're asking, what are the essential things that need to be done. So I think there is flexibility. I think there's certainly flexibility in the agency's part. There can be flexibility on the part of commercial drug manufacturers, although to some extent there's also a little bit of rigidity, because once they have a well-established system, they kind of like to continue it on. You know, it decreases errors and things like that if they continue it forward. So, you know, we have to work through those tensions. But there's certainly our goal, and I think even, you know, everybody's goal, is that you only do what is necessary to answer the questions, the important questions. And so I think that's part of what we're asking is always, what are those important questions? You know, there are people who would say in a large, simple trial, all you really need to know is who died and when they died. And then you would have to do nose studies, you know. But oftentimes people don't think that's enough information. A lot of times in cancer, people really do want to know what's happening to their tumor as well as how long they're living. So it's that kind of tension. But there are likely some issues of flexibility that can always be discussed in any clinical trial.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
I just wanted to make a follow-up comment, is that, you know, with the targeted therapies, so more and more clinical trials, in a way, will be personalized. So, you know, people who have that specific target, so the trials are being done for that population. I mean, CAT scan thing Pat already discussed. But the other thing is that your point that, you know, can these trials be done in all the hospitals? So I think not from all over the places, including NCI has a push on community-based clinical trials. So I think that we will be seeing more and more of the community-based, not just the academic-based clinical trials. So with that, I think we're going to have to close the facilitated discussion. Is it something really, do we have one really quick thing?
Really quickly, if the clinical trial is going to do testing for mutations, then the patients deserve that information. To hide that from the patients, which has happened several times, is completely unacceptable, to not tell them what their mutation is.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
I agree. So I want to thank, my portion's almost done of the meeting. We're going to go into an open public comment in a minute, but I want to sincerely thank, on behalf of my colleagues, your discussion today and your continuing discussion in the docket. After the public comment, we will see if there's any comments on the web that haven't been raised. So I thank you also on the web. And with that, we're going to move into the open public comment period, and it is, we're not going to use timers or anything, and I think we'll just stay where you are. So there are five people. If your comment's already been made, you can decline to do the comment. We just ask that you really stick to 3 minutes, and I'll nudge you along if you go over 3 minutes. We don't have to have any timers. And if you can, state your, if you have any affiliation and you want to state that, please do so as part of your comment. So we have, in this order, Susan Warmerdam, James Fang, Kim McCleary, Raymond Powers, and Donna Adkins. So we'll start with Susan. If do you still have a comment to make? Okay.
There we go. Sorry. Because there aren't a lot of treatments out there for me, I've kind of taken it upon myself to do some other things within my control that I feel, and I guess it's the main thing, is I feel that they're helping, whether that be helping my cancer, helping my immune system, helping my attitude. I mean, I've done everything from renewed my faith to holistic practices, putting water filters on every sink and shower head in my home, and air filters and air filtering plants and electromagnetic field protectors. I could go on and on. But I think most drastically what I've changed that I feel has made the biggest difference is my diet. I've moved to primarily plant-based diet with an occasional fish protein. And while I realize you're not the F part of the FDA, I just had a question. If any research you know of is being done in relationship to cancer and food, for example, like the safety and labeling of foods.
I'm not sure if my colleagues will be able to answer that now, but it's on the public record, and if information can come out, if we can address that, we will follow up with you directly. But your question is out there on the public record. Is there any other part of your comment? Is that?
That's it.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Susan. We have James. James is here.
Thank you. I'm James Pong. I'm actually with the NCI in basic research, so it's been a rather different perspective. And I think that, and also Ruth's situation was somewhat different because the initial diagnosis was thyroid cancer. And in fact, it was only after the thyroidectomy that the tissue reports, histology, and special stains and so forth came back to say that this was a metastatic lesion from a primary in the lung. And so you can see that we really went through some roller coaster responses in terms of the options that were open to us, from a initial diagnosis of follicular thyroid cancer, which would be cured by thyroidectomy and then ablative radioiodine therapy, to one of non-small cell lung cancer. So it was, quite a change. And so our physician at the NCI, when she, very excitedly, both of us having a little insomnia, emailed us at 4 a.m. to tell us that we actually had the exon 19 deletion mutation, EGF receptor. I mean, so we then knew that there was a targeted therapy that worked. And so that's why we're very, we're going through what you mentioned, that, wondering when the next drug will be available and whether or not she will have the mutation which will be responsive, that conveys resistance to erlotinib. And so, we're just very delighted, that basically we're at this phase after having had the roller coaster of emotional responses to what was going on. So.
Thank you, James. Kim McCleary, in the back.
Thank you. My name is Kim McCleary. I'm an independent advocate who has worked in the patient-focused health policy and research area for 22 years. And I'd like to thank the FDA, and particularly Dr. Mullen, Admiral Queter, Dr. Woodcock, Sarah, Andrea Graham, and the whole team for this series of patient-focused drug development workshops and their efforts to understand the real-world context of conditions selected for these workshops by creating a multi-layered dialogue with patients and their advocates. I've been part of the process consultation meetings to shape the format for these workshops and also participated in planning meetings for the ME-CFS workshop that opened the series and served on a panel at that meeting providing data from a survey conducted of 1,400 ME-CFS patients. I also viewed the webcast of the HIV workshop 2 weeks ago, so today is my third workshop. And I'd like to offer a couple of observations of themes that are emerging across the three that have been conducted so far. First is just to commend the FDA for their consistent respect and compassion for the patients sharing their experiences and for drawing out the patient experiences through the questioning and the format. That's just been really great over the three conducted so far. Also for providing ways for patients to participate in person, live on the web, with the recorded, archived recordings of the webcast, and then through the docket, even though most people don't know what a docket is, and the transcript of the meeting, the workshop report. It's just, almost every format that you could hope for, the FDA has made that available. Second is striking to me the prominence of disabling fatigue as a life-impacting symptom, whether it's primary to the condition or a consequence of treatment or both. That was certainly a feature at the chronic fatigue syndrome meeting and at the HIV meeting, and we heard a lot about it this morning. And I expect you'll hear about fatigue from the narcolepsy patients who will be here in September. This strikes me because having spent 22 years in chronic fatigue syndrome ME/CFS research, I know how poor the measurement tools are for measuring fatigue. And it seems that maybe there's a way through CPATH or some of the other FDA partnerships to help better measure fatigue like we do with fever and blood sugar. And maybe mobile health apps or wearable technologies like a Fitbit will give us new tools to be able to do that more sensitively, since this dimension seems to cross so many diagnostic categories. Another common theme across the three patient groups is the prevalence of comorbidities in the face of serious disease. The aging process, immediate treatment effects, long-term treatment consequences, chronicity of disease all create new health conditions that complicate care and create new burdens for the individual patient and their caregivers. It also creates challenges for treatment sponsors in studying the safety and efficacy of new therapies. And finally, in each of the three conditions highlighted so far, the patients are taking a number of medications, with some using multiple medications at one time and others who go serially through different medications. Drug interactions, serial treatment effects, treatment resistance all need to be better understood in these conditions as regulatory decisions are being made. Again, thank you for this important series and the enhancements you've made with each of the three workshops so far. That's impressive on its own, but as somebody who's been to dozens of federal meetings over 2 decades, it's particularly impressive. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kim. We have Raymond Powers. Raymond Powers, second chance. Okay. Then we will go on to Donna Adkins. Donna, if you can just raise your hand so we...
And I'll be brief. Most of what I wanted to say has already been said, but I greatly appreciate what the FDA is doing and want to say thank you on behalf of our family and all of the patients that are out there that you are looking at this, and to bring some awareness that in 1984, when my father died of lung cancer and we were in the hospital, cancer was such a hush word at that time that the nurse would not tell me my father had lung cancer had come back. I knew it had. He had his lung removed 2 years ago prior to that, so we knew what he was dying of. The doctor had told me what was happening with him. So I'm very appreciative that in 2013 we have come this far, that the very cancer that killed my father, my mother-in-law, is now a 7-year survivor. So I thank you for all of your efforts that you have done in making that happen. And just ask as we move forward that you continue to look at drug therapies that help the patient based on their own diagnosis and more personalized. In the case of our daughter at age 26, there is not a drug out there that will address her pain. Flexerol is not the drug that she needs. Cymbalta is not the drug that she needs. But yet every day she has pain. She cannot sleep because of the pain from the thoracotomy. So at age 26, they're looking at her as though she's age 50 and trying to give her drugs that are not addressing it. So look at drugs that are more personalized medicine for the patient, because everyone is different. Everyone's body is different in how that they're going to respond. And just the other thought would be more transparency. We know that they have her tumor, that they're doing research on her tumor in 3 different universities, but we will never know those outcomes. And as a mother and as my daughter, we would both, as a nurse, her being a nurse, would like to know the outcomes. What did they find out from her tumor? You know, is it going to help a patient down the road? Is there something that gives us the answer as to why she received this type of cancer? The not knowing, I think, for patients is very hard when you can't put your finger and say, well, this is why I was diagnosed with this disease. You know, was it something that somebody else is going to be able to change later so that they don't have the diagnosis? And again, I thank you for the opportunity to be here today and for all that you are doing on behalf of patients.
Thank you, Donna. That's it for the open public comment. Pujita, do you want to give some of the web comments that are maybe not what we've heard so far, or reiterate other points that we have heard?
Okay, thank you. We have actually received a lot of comments on the web and will not be able to summarize them all. However, when thinking about decision making, web participants feel that quality of life is very important, and this includes the quality of support from a well-informed medical team. We also have someone on the web comment that he would never forego effective treatment due to fear of side effects. For scenario 1, a web participant comments that she would pass on treatment with drug X because 2 versus 10 months is not enough time. She would consider the drug if life was prolonged by at least 3 years. Another web participant says he would try drug X since not all patients have the same side effects.
Thank you, Pujita. There are, I'll put a reminder out that there are evaluation forms so we can get your feedback if you would like to share that. And so if you haven't gotten one, I think they're still at the registration table. And if you have and you want to fill it out, just put it at the registration table as you leave. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Teresa Mullen to give some final remarks. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you, Sarah. And I want to really begin the closing by thanking you all so much, and to the patients and advocates who've come and come up here in our panel, and to all the others of you who've contributed and just come today. I want to thank you for first of all, your courage, which is very evident in what you've told us about what you've gone through yourselves and in describing the experiences of others, and your generosity, both in sharing that with us and giving us your time to come here today. What you've told us about has really provided us with a lot of insight, a lot of very helpful information, and far too much for me to kind of fully recap, but I will just go over some of the things that I took away from this and heard. And to begin with, we were talking about symptoms, and as it's been pointed out by many, including, I guess, Kim McCleary, that fatigue is one of the central things you were telling us about, but that also getting diagnosed in many cases sounds like it was really a kind of a fortunate coincidence that you had symptoms that were really not very, didn't point to lung cancer, and that you kind of accidentally almost, but happily discovered and were able to start getting treatment. We also heard that lung cancer is somewhat unique in that there's a stigma that people question your lifestyle, that's a sort of unique aspect of lung cancer. That's not something that happens when other people talk about other cancers, and what role your lifestyle may have played, and that it sounds, that's just sort of insult and hurt on top of the injury and kind of the what you're already going through, even that smoking's a highly addictive condition or disease itself, and that can lead to and increase the risk of getting lung cancer. There were then a lot of discussion about treatments. Effectiveness sounds like it just varies a great deal. The side effects vary a lot, but some experience relatively minor, others it's fairly terrible. Fatigue sounds like the most, and debilitating impact of therapy sounds like the biggest sort of concern. And that circumstances vary in terms of people's willingness to actually tolerate that, and how you weigh the benefits and the risks that you may be exposed to. We've heard that, certainly people with young children, dependent children, have more willingness, or may feel, that it's worth it, that they'll just need to tolerate whatever risks if it can extend your life to take care of your children and take care of your family. And that in terms of that survey that we did, probably prolonging life and possibly prolonging life were, just very consistently the most important factors that you mentioned, relieving symptoms, coming in a bit much less than that. You weren't as concerned, from what we heard from those who responded today, about the administration, the form of administration. And side effects were, again, is not as important if there was a real benefit. And related to that, when we asked about how much benefit, there was interest among many of you who responded to that in a sort of 2 months, but it sounds like what the other point that you have made to us is that with new treatments, you really want a clear understanding of what the added benefit might be, and particularly if that can be translated into your individual circumstances, into looking at perhaps your genetic makeup and what your particular risks may be, what side effects you may be particularly at risk for, so that the more clear and the better our information along those lines, the more useful it would be to you in making decisions. And many other things. We look forward to getting the comments from our docket and a further analysis of all that you've told us today. And I just want to thank you again, and I hope you have a safe travels back to home and have a wonderful weekend. Thanks.
Since we don't have people jumping up, I will then officially say that this meeting is closed, and you are free to go and get your lunch and head out on your weekend. Thank you again so much.